One of the things I wanted to try out last year was to move from using soap nuts to Conkers, and the main reason for this is I didn't see the point in importing something halfway around the world if what I needed was already in the back garden for free. So I had to wait till autumn to collect enough Conkers, and then I had to start by breaking them up. You need to break them up because it's not the shell that you need, it's the inside that has all the saponins, and that's what's going to wash your clothes and make sure that they come out clean and not disgusting and grimy. You can use a knife if that's what you want to do, but I found it to be a little bit hazardous and I nearly lost a finger a few times, so in the end I just switched to a hammer. It was much more simple and a lot more fun. For the next step, I wanted to grind them up into more of a crumbly consistency rather than those big blocks you can see. The reason for this is it makes it a little bit faster when you're making the washing liquid, because you need to leave it in a jar to soak for a bit. If it's ground up into, well, crumbs essentially like this, you'll find you only need 20, maybe 30 minutes before you've got a nice tub of liquid to use. If you just leave it into the broken up pieces, you're going to have to leave it overnight. Ultimately, it depends on what works for you. Since I'm a bit of a scatterbrain, for me it was worth the extra time it was going to take me to make this, but whichever method works for you. Now, when it comes to dehydrating this, I used a few different methods. I used the oven and I also used the dehydrator. Ultimately, the dehydrator worked better for me because I kept forgetting it in the oven and they came out looking like humiliated brownies, which doesn't look good. It didn't really affect how well they worked, maybe a tiny bit, but not something which was massively noticeable. I checked because I did 2 different batches, one with the batch I had burnt and one with the batch that I hadn't, and I didn't really notice a massive difference in terms of how clean they were. There was just the general smell of it. The stuff which is nicely dehydrated, oddly enough, smells like cookies. The stuff which is burnt to a crisp smells like humiliated cookies. It really just depends on what you want and what works for you. Ultimately, the dehydrator worked for me, so that's what I ended up sticking with for the rest of the batch. For storing the Conkers, I ended up not keeping them in this jar and instead putting them in the tin that I used to keep my soap nuts in. What I do is I keep a small bag of rice inside. You can also use one of those dehydrating sachets if you want. I just prefer using the rice, and I always make sure to give it a little bit of a shuffle just in case anything maybe at the bottom isn't perfectly dehydrated before adding half a spoon into a jar. Then you just want to fill it up with water. You can use any water, you don't need to use anything fancy. Leave it to sit there for about 20-30 minutes. You know it's right once it starts to go a bit of a milky colour, and then you just go ahead and pour it in the sink. Do pour it through a sieve or you will destroy your washing machine. If you have any other questions about using Conkers or you're thinking of making the switch, I've written a full blog post which I've linked down the description box. This will cover most of the questions that I can think of about using Conkers, but if you have any other extra ones, just leave a comment in the description box and I'll try and add them to the blog post.
But you don't even know the fool that you've become. Along with all your pride